In this movie, I'll show you how to correct for the overly saturated colors inside this image, and I'll also show you how to increase the contrast of the midtones. We accomplish both feats from the Shadows Highlights dialog box, so I'll double-click on the words Shadows Highlights here inside the Layers panel in order to bring the dialog box back up on screen. Notice this color correction value right there. If you increase that value, you're not going to correct the colors. You're going to increase the saturation of the colors inside the image. So it's ultimately a saturation slider. And notice if you want to get rid of the saturation, you would take that color correction value down. By default, it's set to 20, which I think is absolutely insane, given that what you want is 0, because when you set that value to 0, you do not modify the saturation of the original colors at all. Now, you may end up getting a little bit of grayness inside of some areas of the image, especially where the midtones are concerned. We can see a little bit of grayness, for example, around this right-hand ear. However, that can be adjusted for in better ways than just cranking up the saturation of all colors throughout the image. And the better way is to adjust this midtone contrast value. So notice if I take this value up, we increase the contrast of the luminance levels in general. This one is not an edge detection effect, so it's not using haloing. It's closer to a straight contrast adjustment like you would achieve using the brightness contrast command. And of course, if you want less contrast, you would reduce that contrast value, but that's when you start seeing a lot of grays throughout the midtones inside the image. So what I'm going to do is start at 100. Just the maximum value, and then press Shift down arrow in order to reduce that value in increments of 10. And at about 40, we end up getting an effect that I really like. Now we also have black clip and white clip. What these are saying by default, once again, is that Photoshop is going to clip up to 0.01% of the luminance levels inside the image. In other words, 100% of the luminance levels are going to clip to black, and 100% of the luminance levels are going to clip to white. If you are at all worried about that, just change these values to 0. And you are going to see a subtle difference if you take the black clip value down to 0%, so no clipping is occurring. You're not going to see much difference at all if you take that white clip value down to 0%. And then if you like what you see, you can always save these settings as your new defaults, which would be great because you've got big radius values. You've also got 0 for color correction, which is a great place to start. And we have a pretty enthusiastic midtone contrast value as well. In my case, I'm going to leave things alone, and I'll click on the OK button in order to accept my changes. And once again, let's see a before and after here. This is the before version of the image. More than anything else, you can see that the colors were just ridiculously saturated, and he's got that sunburn effect to just about all of his skin tones. And this is the after effect with not only much better colors inside the image, but more of a dynamic effect throughout the midtones with a striking degree of contrast throughout this image. And just to get a sense for the overall effect of the filter, I'll turn Smart Filters off. This is the original version of the image, quite washed out by comparison. And if I press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac, that turns the filter back on to show our much more dramatic effect.